to the shadows, where I hope you find peace in the dark. These videos are handpicked week by week, and if you find yourself enjoying the content, make sure to bring your flashlight and leave a like, because it's always dark in the shadows. Without further ado, let's get into it. And before I forget, I now have a Discord and Instagram for all of you to follow along with. Feel free to check it out, chat with each other, and share stories even. Anyway, back to the story. When you lose a child, the therapists say all kinds of things about the grieving process. You'll search for any reason to blame yourself. You'll play the last moments in your head on repeat. You'll go numb for months on end. But there's one thing my grief counselor never told me. She never said anything about the noise. None of the books talked about it either. The giggles, the coughs, and creaking of doors, the bouncing of cupboards and clinking of toys, all the sounds a child fills a home with, vanish in a breath. The silence that remains bears down on you like smoke. It suffocates you, and sometimes it kills you. And then one day, as you drift down like a wraith down the empty halls of your home, a sound rings out in the quiet. Sometimes it's a sniffle, sometimes it's little footsteps. Your brain dismisses the noise because it's so familiar, so commonplace. Then reality catches up and reminds you that your child is gone. I was in bed the first time it happened. A faint yawn stirred me from my sleep. I ignored it and rolled over, knowing it was just Sophie in her room nearby. A few seconds later, I jolted upright, trying to remember if the hell that I'd been living in was all a dream, trying to remember if my daughter was really down the hall. It doesn't matter how much time passes, you'll always hear the noises, and the realization is always the same. Sophie is gone, and she's never coming back. Some part of my brain just can't let her go, and fills the vacuum of her absence with fleeting signs of life. I've been trapped in this house with a head full of ghosts for half a year now. At first I heard the noises only as I went about my day, but soon they began to spill into my dreams. I'd sometimes be awoken by her laughter, or by my own cries as I tore through the woods in search of her. With the passage of time, I began dreaming of something worse. It's not the one where I'd find out she ran away on purpose, or the one where the cops tell me they found a body. It's darker, more sinister. Something comes out of the woods towards my house. It comes at night and looks up at the windows. I always know what it wants. In some dreams, it stands outside my daughter's room and calls her in a raspy voice. I watch her open the window and vanish into the freezing dark. I never actually see the thing. I always scream myself awake at the moment it turns to look at me. I'm too afraid. I spend almost no time in my bedroom. Instead, I try to nap in the living room with music playing, or I try to get work done in the downstairs office. Then, a week ago, I heard it while I was awake. A strange noise somewhere outside. It crackled like a branch snapping or a fence breaking. I grabbed a flashlight and my father's old K-bar and stepped out in the cold. To those who don't know, a K-bar is more of like a bounty knife, if you will. My property spans a few acres, and the far end of my yard locks up against thick woods. A while back, an old couple driving home from church claimed that they'd seen a girl matching Sophie's description. They saw her walking toward the forest, but nothing ever turned up. I circled my house, but I couldn't locate the source of the noise. It happened again for 3 consecutive nights, and on the last, I was ready for it. I threw the back door open the moment the crackling arose. There, at the edge of the woods, something lurched between the trees and receded into the darkness. Sleep barely came at all after that. My mind kept trying the wicked dreams to what had happened outside, and soon I became a believer to whoever or whatever was visiting my home wasn't just a figment of imagination. Last night, my visitor returned. I watched it from a window in the upstairs hall. I saw it emerge from the murky woods and move across the field beneath the pale moon. The thing didn't walk with the familiar rhythm of a biped. Instead, it skittered, transferring its weight fluidly from one indiscernible limb to another, or occasionally rolling and diving like a tumbleweed. All the while, its pallid head bobbed around on a contorted neck, studying everything or nothing at all, as the ground and sky rushed past. The creature made its way around my house, touching and tapping and scratching on doors and windows, looking for a way in. I scrambled for the knife, and just as I did, there was a knock on the front door. It was a polite but purposeful knock. I had not seen the hideous thing outside moments before. I had been given certain it was a neighbor checking in on me. I stood there at the top of the stairs in the darkness of my home, gazing down at the front door as the knocks repeated in threes. My body went stiff, and the longer I froze there, the more intense the knocking grew. Soon, the thing outside pounded and scratched at my door with such force that the dreadful sounds echoed through every inch of the house. The creature issued desperate groans and rattled the knob, swelling with rage each passing moment. At last I regained control of myself and snuck down the stairs, K-bar in hand, ready to shred the thing to bits if it ever came inside. The old door reached the end of its integrity and split apart, revealing a sight so gruesome I nearly vomited. My eyes perceived the being parts, but my brain couldn't compose them into familiar objects. Snarls of rotted wood and bone, hanging scraps of flesh, ropes of vine and slick red muscle that twitched and rippled as the monster breached my entryway. The hulking mass rushed toward me, wet feet slapping the hardwood floor and leaving trails of soil and blood. I tried to scream as the thing seized me up in its grip and studied me. I tried to slice at it, but it clamped down on my arm with breathtaking strength. It yanked me close to its dry and sallow face, and I imagined my head might have been stolen from a near fresh corpse. The thing peered down into my soul with idoless eyes and screamed in terror, as if witness to something even more ghastly than itself. It mumbled something to me, something wet and guttural. My gaze fell on the crown jewel of its horrors, a set of ragged, gory lips stretched over hundreds of mismatched teeth. What looked like fishing line snaked its way through the maw, soon in cruel hands, pulled taut to imprison the face of an eternal grimace. The room went sideways and my back slammed against the floor. The ceiling flew past and gave way to a starry sky. Wet grass licked my skin. My screams filled the night air and reverberated all around me. I hackled and slashed at its putrid hand, but the creature never stopped dragging me toward the woods. I knew death awaited, and soon the shadows swallowed me up. Pitiful groans echoed in the forest all around me, but they were not mine. They came from a man in terrible pain, and the image of half-eaten person crawling around the leaves appeared in my mind's eye. That I was probably going to be next. The moans grew louder and louder until finally my captor snatched me up off the ground and stood me upright, gripping my head in its gnarled hands to show me something. A naked man, near dead, bound to a tree with a net of roots and vines. "Mark?" I said in disbelief. I knew this man. He lived a few miles up the road, and we always ran into each other down at the general store. He even knew my kid. "Oh, God," he sobbed. He wasn't relieved to see me. In fact, he hid his eyes as much as he could. Mark had taken a brutal beating. Purple and black welts covered his face, and lacerations of varying depth crisscrossed his body. Dried blood caked from his form like war paint. Who knows how long he'd been held captive? The creature pressed its rotten face against my ear and mumbled something indecipherable. It let me go and lurched toward the wounded man, growling through its jagged teeth. Mark wailed for mercy, but the creature would not give him in. It grabbed his throat and squeezed until Mark's eyes bugged wide open, and then pointed a long, crooked finger in my direction. "Yes," Mark cried between shallow breaths. "Yes, okay, it was me. It was me, Felix." The creature watched me, awaiting my reaction, but Mark's words locked me down as tightly as roots had held him. Memories of my daughter flooded my thoughts like a drug, fast and warm, taking my mind far away from the gloomy woods we stood in. "I told her to follow me," he continued. I tricked her. I'm sick, Felix. It's because of my old man. I can feel him in me, making me ugly." The images of little Sophie laughing and playing and holding my head sped up. They drifted by faster and faster until they all blurred into each other. From the day she was born, through saying goodbye to her mom in the hospital, till the last time I saw her get out of school and walk down the end of the road, my mind raced over the memory of me arriving just a few minutes late that evening. The bus was already gone, and so was my daughter. A long moment passed. The creature never tore its dead gaze from me. Then, the only words I could find came slinking out of my mouth in a mere whisper. "She trusted you." Hearing those words out loud ignited hellfire inside me. My reason evaporated, and ineffable hatred settled over me like a fog that snaked between the trees. I charged at Mark, K-bar in death grip, and wanted to bury it in the mouth he spoke to my child with. But before I could reach him, the creature intercepted me and stopped me dead in my tracks. It pried the knife from my hand and flung it into the woods and peered into my eyes. I stared into a face transformed by death, and yet I could see it come alive with sorrow. It looked as revolted as I felt. What this being knew of human ethics was inscrutable, but it seemed to understand the situation in a natural context. The man was a predator, and my little girl was the prey. And it seemed to detect that this sort of hunting was not the normal order of things. The man wasn't hunting to eat, but rather to feed a darker sort of hunger. The creature released me and pointed to a nearby tree. At its base lay a white bedsheet, likely taken from the clothesline of a nearby farmhouse. My eyes moved over the contours of its surface, tracing the gentle features of a child's body. My heart collapsed into a black hole. My chest nearly caved in with it. All this time I had said, it's worse to have a missing child than a dead one, because in death at least you have the answer. But the moment Sophie's shape registers in my head, I'd have given anything for her to go back to being a question. The creature pointed back the way we had came, back to my home. Then it reached up to its horrid face. It tore at the wire that had sealed its mouth shut, and snarled when the ragged lips came free. It returned to Mark and grabbed his throat as it had before, but this time it thrust its face against his. Horrified shrieks rang out in the woods, followed by the sickening sound of flesh splitting away. It looked back at me, gagging on the tongue that it had just stolen from the man, until finally the appendage slipped into place. The creature then said, "Leave." I ignored the lightning bolts of pain that arced between my head and chest and scooped up Sophie's remains, bedsheet swaddling her tiny form. Mark's howls followed me to the edge of the woods and cut out abruptly as I stepped into the fields. The walk home was a solemn one, guided by the fire of a cresting sun, I broke ground just beneath my bedroom window and dug until the dawn light reached the western hills. By the time that I had patted the last heap of dirt onto Sophie's resting place, the shadows had vanished from the edge of the woods, all but one. It loomed for just a while, then receded, never to darken my fields again. In time, the sounds that had haunted receded as well, and I could finally grieve in peace. At the end of the day, something had taken my daughter, and the forest had given her back. As always, if you liked tonight's story, feel free, give a like. It truly does help out the channel and bring better content for the next video. And if you find yourself coming back to the shadows, remember, bring a flashlight. It's always dark. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to always get notified of the newest tragedies